Hello there, 7th graders. This is Ms. Minowitz, and I'm here today to talk to you about some of the vocabulary words that we are going to be using in this unit looking in genetics and heredity. And a lot of these terms sometimes students confuse because they're similar or related to each other or used in what students feel like are pretty similar situations. So let's get started here. The first word I want to talk about is heredity. So heredity is the passing of traits from parents to offspring. So how do traits get passed along from one generation to the next? How do you get different things from your parents, such as eye color, hair color, things like that? In order to really understand this definition, you need to understand what the word trait means. So trait is a genetically determined characteristic. It is something about an individual that it's something about an individual that you can tell. For example, I've got pictures here. Eye color is a trait. Your blood type is a trait. Your hair color is a trait. Any sort of different characteristic like that. It can be physical, doesn't have to be a physical trait. But these would be some examples of different things that are termed traits. A gene, okay, is part of your DNA. And a gene is a set of instructions for an inherited trait. So you might have a gene that helps to determine what your blood type will be. It's an actual piece of that DNA, like we extracted from the strawberries, but this time we're usually referring to humans, but it doesn't have to be. We're talking about that part of that DNA and that part of that chromosome that tells you about a specific trait. So it might be a gene for eye color. It might be a gene for hair color. It might be a gene that affects your height. Just remember that a gene is part of your DNA, like it shows in the picture here. An allele is an alternate or a different form of a gene. So the gene that we're talking about, for example, might be hair color or eye color. There are different forms of that gene that tell you you should have blue eyes or brown eyes or green eyes. Those different forms of that gene would all be called alleles. Okay? So your diagram here, for example, shows a chromosome. A chromosome. And on that chromosome, it's saying, hey, at this spot we have this gene for flower color. This chromosome, though, has one gene or one allele that is saying, hey, this flower should be purple. And this one here has a gene that says, hey, this flower should be white. Those different forms of that gene are referred to as alleles. Genotype and phenotype are very similar sounding words, or words that students get confused. The genotype is the inherited combination of alleles. So this refers to what genes do you have. So you might have a gene that makes you one that says tall and one that says short. Or you might have two that say short. Okay. When we talk about genotype, we're always referring to the actual alleles. And remember, alleles are represented by either a capital or a small letter, depending on if they're dominant or recessive, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the genotype, okay, is always represented by some different letters here. Okay, saying, hey, these represent the actual genes that you have. Phenotype, on the other hand, has to do with what something looks like. So if, for example, you have a genotype here that says, hey, this one says tall and this one says short, well, are you tall or are you short? Or do you have blue eyes or do you have brown eyes? Okay, so genotype is the genes. It's given by the actual letters here. And phenotype is what it looks like. If you look at the diagram here, it shows an example in flowers. So this flower here has two purple alleles. That is its genotype, capital B, capital B. Its phenotype is what it looks like. It looks like purple. So its genotype would be capital B, capital B. Its phenotype would be purple. This next one here has a capital B and a little b for its genotype. It has one purple and one white allele, but its phenotype is purple. It is purple in color. On the right here, we have little b, two white alleles. This is genotype, and its phenotype would be white flowers. Now, if the alleles are the same when we're talking about a genotype, if the alleles are the same, that is referred to as homozygous. For example, if you look at this picture here, this gene is a capital A, this one is a capital A. These two alleles here are the same. Heterozygous, the alleles are different. So hetero means different. We see a capital A here and a little a here for the alleles. These are not the same, so we would say that this one on the right here is heterozygous. Its alleles are different. On the left, these two are the same, so we would call this homozygous. Now, I want you to go ahead, pause the video here, take a minute, and go through and identify if the following are homozygous or heterozygous. So go ahead and pause, then when you've got it done, turn the video back on, and we'll go through the answers. All right, I hope that you had a chance to look through this and you have identified if everything here is either homozygous or heterozygous. So let's take a look at the example on the left, on the top. We have capital H, capital H. These two alleles in this genotype, they're the same. Capital H and capital H are the same, so we would say that this is homozygous. And you can abbreviate that to HO. Okay. If we go down, we have capital T and then little t. These are not the same. They're not both capital or they're not both small, so you would say that this is heterozygous. Their alleles are different. You might be noticing, hey, they're always the same letter. We use a letter to represent each gene, and since alleles are different forms of a gene, it's always going to be the same letter next to each other. It's just whether they're both capital or small. Capital H, little h, those are different. They're not both capital, they're both small, so we would say that this one is heterozygous. Capital N, those are the same, homozygous. Little h, the same, homozygous. Little p, the same, homozygous. Capital T, exactly the same, homozygous. Capital A, little a, these are different. One's capital, one is small, so that would be heterozygous. Okay, so if they're the exact same, homozygous, if one is capital and one is small, that is heterozygous. Now, you might be trying to figure out, well, why are some of these capital and some of these small? What does that mean? That leads us into our next set of words here, the first of which is dominant. Okay. So dominant is referring to a type of allele. This is an allele that is always expressed. So only one copy of this allele is needed for the trait to show. So, for example here, I've got yellow and I've got green when I'm looking at pea pods. This one here has one yellow allele and one green allele. However, the dominant one is the yellow one, and we know that because we get a yellow pea pod. So we only need one of it to show up. It's a dominant. And you'll notice here that dominant is always represented by a capital letter. That's how we know that it's the dominant allele. If you look here, the green is not dominant. It is not in a capital letter. And we're going to get to, it is what's called recessive, which we're going to get to next. So remember, dominant, if we have one of it, it shows up. Always one allele. All right, recessive alleles are alleles whose effects are not always observed because sometimes it is masked or hidden. You need two copies of this allele to show the trait. This is always shown with a lowercase letter or small letter. So if we look at the example on the right here, this again is looking at flower color here. The dominant trait is the capital B here, that is purple. Anytime you see one capital B, it's purple. But if you don't see any and you see two of the little b's, that is the recessive trait, white. When there's only that there, we're going to see white color. All right, so I hope that you were able to work through some of these different words here. Other thing I wanted to point out is you'll notice that there are usually two alleles, or there are usually two alleles for each gene. So what I mean is you don't just see, hey, capital B or little b. And the reason why there you have two copies of each one is because you get one from each parent. Remember, you have two sets of chromosomes. You get one from each parent, so you get one gene from each.